Okay, so we've built our grid. We've thought about how much we're going to bid for our ads. Now, what do we actually put in the ads themselves? Well, look, I don't pretend to be any kind of creative genius, so feel free to go get ideas and inspiration from elsewhere, and I'll give you a resource for that in a minute. Um, but your ads need to be at least halfway decent. Okay, so we've got these various elements of an ad: headline, description, image, and the call to action. So from a headline point of view, how are you different from your competitors? That's a great place to start, but definitely be thinking in terms of benefits, not features. Description, I stole this line from my mate Justin Brooke. The description should be a summary of the problem that your product, not problem, your product solves. Yes, you can use discounts and promotions. I'm not a fan of that for a couple of reasons. One, I don't like to discount too early. I would much rather add value than discount price. It's very, very hard to be profitable if you get stuck in the habit of discounting. But also, if you're going to use discount codes, unless you can somehow code the website in such a way that people visiting via a particular URL, via a particular link, are automatically going to get that discount added, that can get very frustrating for a consumer. If you have an ad that says, yes, you can have 20% off, use the code blah, 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 and the only place that code is mentioned is in the ad, there is no way, well, the vast majority of people are not going to remember that code 5 minutes later when they make it to the checkout page of your website. They can then get frustrated at you, at the brand at that point, and that can have a detrimental effect rather than increasing sales. It can actually have the opposite effect. So unless you're able to build some sort of discount code into the URL, and by that I mean when they click on the ad, they land on the site, and when they get to the cart page, that coupon code is automatically applied for them. There are ways to do that, but most devs often don't know how to do that. So that's another problem. So think about adding value rather than discounting. When it comes to the image itself, remember that half of the traffic is likely to be on mobile devices. Have a look at your website, have a look at your stats. It might be different for you, but think about then people potentially outside or in sunlight. So crank up the contrast, maybe crank up the hue, bright colors, or do something like this, a black and white image with a spot of color. It's, I think, quite, or often quite eye-catching when you've got a page that is, think about where your ad is showing. On this page, a page that's part of Google's display network, there's probably a lot of color on there, and a black and white ad can often stand out. And a black and white ad with a little bit of color in there is often, our brains are wired to spot contrast, to spot the thing that's different from everything else. Now, you got to play with that because you don't want to just be almost sort of clickbaity. You don't want something that, yes, grabs loads of attention and people go, oh, what's that? And click, but they weren't interested. But that shouldn't really happen too much with remarketing because you know that these people, you know which square on the grid you're targeting, you know their behavior, you know what they're worth to you. So if they're clicking through, you've got a fair idea of how profitable they are likely to be to the business. And then test different calls to action. So something like finish checkout is probably fine these days. It's not something I would have used um, 9, 10 years ago when I first started using remarketing. I think Google's remarketing came out in 2010. I think I've been on stage talking about it since 2011. Back then, I talked about the creepy line, and it was very, very important not to cross the creepy line. Remarketing was very new back then, but these days, I think most consumers are aware of it, familiar with it. They don't understand how it works, but they understand that when I go to a site, I often see an ad talking about that product I was just looking at. It's not creepy anymore. So it's okay to reference that past behavior. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would have said always reference the future behavior that you want someone to take. Never talk about what they've done, only talk about what you want them to do. So I wouldn't have done that in the past, but I think it's absolutely fine these days. Things like claim, save, obviously those are good words to use anytime. All right, we'll stop here and then we'll talk about how else you can use remarketing audiences.